welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has sparred with demons from the nine hells themselves and shall barely break a sweat here today.
Tim Longo.
See, I knew that you would not know what that was and who says it, but you'd be very excited if I told you who said it, which might give you a pretty good hint of who said it.
You mean because of lore stuff that I might be
because
excited?
Of lore stuff that you particularly, you Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end would be excited about.
Oh boy! And it's a side quest of some kind that I would.
It is a side encounter. It's not even a quest. It's really just run into somebody out there in the world.
God, I don't know. Yeah, I mean,
I'll give you a hint.
It's
dark skin. Yep.
Drizz't?
Yes,
oh, you meet?
Drizz't.
I forgot that you meet him.
You meet him. Yes.
Where in the heck do you meet him? I'm gonna have to go because unless you tell me, I might not find it. And
it's in one of the. So it's. I was looking. So there's a side. I found it in course of pursuing a side quest. I was going back to the other chapters, and this will all tie into one of our topics.
Which
but I spent.
Into.
We will. Yeah, I spent a lot of time on side quests this week. Of course, we're talking about Baldur's Gate. Sorry, I don't think we've ever mentioned that yet. A minute and a half in.
We're so excited to talk about it.
We're digging right into to key characters in Faerun and Icewind Dale and Toril and all the other lore, pronomial soup or whatever. But yeah, I was pursuing this quest from chapter 1 where it says, "Oh, some half ogres took my stuff. They're in the mountains southwest of Baragost."
Right.
And so I was just uncovering large sections of map because, I mean, and this is something, we talked about last time, is that it feels like exploring. It's like they don't give you a specific map point. They don't, sometimes they reveal map locations because somebody knows explicitly where something is. But for the most part, things are described as I would describe them if I was sitting around a table.
Yeah.
Like, somewhere south of here, there's another town. And you'd go and maybe you'd find the road and the road would peter out. And then you'd be like, now what do we do? And can we take to the air? Like, I mean,
it's pretty cool, right? I mean, it's so
exactly.
different from today where everything is, a question mark on the map.
Exactly. You get a question mark and it's like, make this my active thing. And it plots out on the ground where you should walk. It's a very different time in games. So I found myself spending huge amounts of time just covering that. But in the course of doing so, I ran across Drizz't fighting like 8 gnolls, and it's like, and of course it's this cameo, and basically he says 2 ththings to you, and that's the thing I think he says. I've sparred with demons from the 9 hells, and then he just you take care of these gnolls, and then he's like, oh, thanks, see ya. And he walks off screen, and that's the end of your connection with Drizz't Doerden or whatever his name is. It's very amusing.
Funny.
As soon as it happened, I was like, oh, this is that. I had a lot of those moments, especially doing side content this time of just going and finding things and going like, oh yeah, I remember this. There's a village of Xvarts, however one pronounces that word, that I remembered.
I vaguely remember that,
that I remember from back then, and like how you'll go through there and Xvart will say, why are you killing all of us? And it's like, because I didn't have any other options. It's the only thing the game lets me do. So there's a lot of just like interesting, like the game has decided certain things are certain ways, and even if the dialogue subverts it, it's like, well, yeah, but I didn't. My only choice is not to come up here at all. Like, if I knew that this was gonna, and I didn't this time, I was just like, well, I'm not gonna go kill that whole town now because I'm aware it's there, but ugh.
Yeah, so, right. Makes you make a decision on reloading or not based on how you want to sort of quote unquote role play.
Right. Your role
within
playing
the boundaries.
Yeah. But also like it's built around, and this is something that I think you'll run into more so, is that this game is really built XP wise around you doing a lot of side content. And I think basically at the time you encounter it, like it's fine to hoover up a bunch of side quests, but then I think they really want you to go and explore a lot of the map and uncover all these things and deal with them, because you need the experience points for challenges later.
Part of the balancing.
Yeah,
it does feel that way. And just as a quick aside for the audience, partially because of basically time, right? The time that it gobbles up to play by playing a completionist version of this, but also when you had originally looked up time to play and it said something like 30 hours for the main game and then like 80 hours for a completionist run. And so it kind of dawned on me at the time, because obviously I tried to experiment a little bit when we play games we've played before on the podcast and try to do things I would not normally do. And so I thought, well, 30 hours, versus 80 hours, that's a pretty big gap. So what is the game like if you don't do, 60 to 80 hours of content? Like, how does it feel? And so that's what obviously there's an advantage because it will take me less time, but also it's a bit of an experiment to see what happens.
Will it take you less time?
Well, so yeah, that's a great point, because there was at least one battle that I can think of that I probably reloaded six times maybe.
Yeah, I've had someone on stream say how they've basically raced to the end of chapter 3 and they've found that they are, or even further, maybe even to 4 or 5, and they're now at the point where battles take forever because they have to reload and try them again multiple times. And the same thing happened. It's not the only one of these that happened. I mean, Temple of Elemental Evil that I've mentioned, I played when, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 years after it came out. There was a point at that game where I was like, you know what? I'm kind of done with this game. I'm just going to race to the finish.
Yeah.
And I got to that final battle and it was brutal. I mean, I finished it, but it was only because I knew which things. Roll. Well, I knew which things I had to get the roll on. Like, well, if they save against this or this doesn't happen or whatever, then I know I just have to reload. Like, I'm not going to get through it. And this game, I think, also has that.
It's frustrating, because I feel like, obviously they're emulating tabletop, and we've already talked about how they're sort of slavishly going after second edition. But it's this game, I think, a lot more than a lot of others. I guess this statement I'm about to say is roughly based on CRPG comparisons versus like tabletop, but sort of play the way you want to play, right? Like that's the dumb version, right? It's I can be evil, I can be good, I can do I can do optional quests, I can not do optional quests, but I'm increasingly feeling like that isn't completely true. Other than obviously, yes, I can be evil and good or whatever, but like I can't. I have to, they've balanced it in such a way that forces you to, unless you want to make your life really difficult by the end, because I assume it's just exponentially worse as I keep going, right? If I don't.
Yeah, I mean, if you run into, I don't know if there's a beholder in this game, but if you run into a beholder, you can't be level 2.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's fundamentally there's no way you get through that battle. The odds are so, I mean,
but then it's like, then you're stuck, right?
As someone said in a movie, an elephant can hang off a cliff by, 2 pieces of grass, but, according to quantum physics. But, so there's probably theoretically, if you rolled all 20s, I guess, maybe you could defeat a beholder at level 2, but the odds are so vanishingly low.
In pre-show, Brett and I were talking about whether we thought there was any dynamic difficulty systems running at all in certain cases, and I think we both kind of felt like probably not. If it is, it's not that noticeable. But if you think about it from a balancing perspective, like when you make such which is another topic I think we have for today we'll get into, but when you make it such a discretely designed, curated experience like it is now, everything from where most of the loot is placed versus again what level you should be at what time. If you look at it on the flip side, if you want to make a game that does give the player a lot of choice on optional quest content, you have to balance it toward that, because then by the time you get to the end, you're going to be so powerful that it's going to be boring. So it's like, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. And so the sweet spot is probably like whatever 40 or 50 hours, right, of content is really like probably what they assume people would do. But I think, I don't know if I ever thought I'd say this, but I feel like some dynamic difficulty knobs to tune for allowing players to play, more of a strata of different ways, I'd vote for in this case.
For sure.
Versus just this is just the numbers are the numbers, and
right.
Good luck,
Yeah,
so.
and I think we got there, right? I mean, eventually, right? I can speak from some experience there, right? I mean, the Elder Scrolls series in particular, right, has, with Oblivion, I think they went too far.
That was the non-dynamic, right?
No, it's dynamic.
Okay.
It is, but it was purely everything was pegged to the player level in Oblivion.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because they dabbled, right? They did a bunch of different experiments.
Well, that was the experiment there, and of course, hardcore fans were like, "Ugh, this is terrible! Like, it's just a treadmill. Then nothing, there is for people who want a challenge. There is no challenge. Blah blah blah. Right? So there was like this, this sort of feedback from longtime fans, right? And then over the course of the next couple of games, the better sweet spot turned out to be, okay, well, sort of do like zones, like an MMO would have.
An MMO, yeah.
Right. But still dynamically adjust the difficulty within them. So like there's a minimum, and there's a maximum maybe, so you can always go to some earlier zone, and if you just want to feel good about yourself and kill a bunch of things that are easy, you have that opportunity, and the odds of getting something actually powerful are quite low. But in general, there you basically have the opportunity to kind of go off the main route and find more difficult areas, and that's kind of that turned out to be a pretty good sweet spot for dynamic difficulty.
Right.
So, you can play Skyrim technically in like a few hours, 4 hours, something like that. If you just want to do the main quest, like you could literally just do the main quest and you could play the game and get the feeling of Skyrim in whatever, 4 to 10 hours or something like that. You'd be leaving a lot on the table. Obviously it's a very big game. But that, there are players who want that. And of course it's a game that it's like, well, then you could come back and just do all the other stuff if you want. So that's a different way to do it. This game this game is sort of similar. It's got a similar structure. We played a couple of JRPGs in that you basically get to a point where you're like, I'm not leveled enough. And you choose to grind. And in a JRPG, you grind against random mobs, or even in like Chrono Trigger, you might go back into an area and get the same mobs again and again, so they're not really random. They are placed and curated.
But they respawn.
They respawn. Yeah. Versus, and of course Zelda's that way too, but it's no XP. It's just if you wanted to do it for fun. Here it's more like, well, at some point, if the challenge is too great, go do some side quests. Yeah. You've got a ton of them on your list. Go clear out go find some maps that you haven't, uncovered all the fog of war on, and see what you find and level up. So.
It's going to be interesting too, because I do predict obviously that I'll have to do some of that, and the few that I've done kind of in the sort of hypothetically out of order. They've been obviously too easy for me, right? Because I'm kind of going backwards a little bit. So it's kind of like it's sort of the worst of both worlds in a way, right?
Yeah, because then
then it's boring,
forever
right?
to level. Yeah,
yeah.
It's also you're not getting, like, I was looking at some point, like in this section, and we should probably talk about the chapter 2 especially, since I did finish that one. But you're fighting lots of kobolds and stuff, and every time I kill a kobold, and it's like, the party gets 7 XP. I'm like, yay, 1 XP per person. Woo.
Yeah, that's rough. That is rough.
And it's really hard to see those numbers on the table, right? And which is also funny, because that's not a thing that you do in tabletop either. You don't see individual encounters as you go, right? And so there's a lot of stuff like that that's just funny. I almost wish this would just tell you at the end of a chapter, and you got this much XP, or
right,
or something
different,
like that, right? Some different structure, because I think the demands of a CRPG the expectations there of like, well, this is how you see continuous improvement.
I feel like
against the tabletop feel, right?
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, you can see that it's alluring to kind of like, I think that they're assuming and I think we still do, to be honest, because I think this is a problem with MMOs as well, as from a structural standpoint. We assume that because it's a computer-generated RPG that you want to see that, because you can give the real-time data like that and you see numbers popping off, that's what people want. But we don't ever, I don't think we very often ask ourselves in every case whether it's good to do that, right? It's just like, oh, finally, the computer can do so much for us. We can just show them that, right away, or have the number pop off the head of the thing I just killed, in an MMO or something. And it's like, oh, see all those numbers going up? And it's like, well, depending on the goals of the project. And in Baldur's Gate's case, it's much more about world building and their story. And, you're really living, trying to live the closest at the time, the closest thing we had to a tabletop experience. And so, to your point, maybe that isn't a good idea to reveal that stuff, or maybe it's like in a chat tab that you can turn on, optionally turn on, but it's not on by default or something like that. That could be an option, but
another thing I guess would be to, one of the things you could do in this game to support the sort of streamlined experience would be when you reach the end of the chapter, just be meta about it and say, hey, look, you've reached the end of the chapter, player. We can level you now to level 3. And everybody will be leveled. You'll go level up every character. However, the quests you haven't done yet will not be fun anymore. They will have no challenge. They'll be easy. It's up to you. Do you want to do the chapter ending now and just move on? Like, that would be your way, I think, at this time to make the trade-off. Like to say, to put it in front of it's sort of like Super Metroid does, right? You go to fight the Mother Brain or whatever, and it says, hey, if you go up this elevator, there's no coming back.
Yeah.
And it's basically signaling to you, hey, this is a hard line, right? And I don't know if you would want to make the hard line, but I think maybe at that point it'd be like, you know what? All the quests from chapter 1 are basically 0 XP. Like, if you want to do them, you're just doing them because you want to see them and not because you're going to get, and just kind of divorce them in that way for people who do want to just kind of rush through and see the highlights of the story. Because the way I'm playing it, I've lost track of what the main story is.
Because you're playing, there's so many
because
other things.
There's something about bandits, I think. I can always go and read the journal, which is very good, and that helps a lot to resituate me. Like, okay, the main quest stuff is typically at the top of the quest thing, and I could go and look and like, oh, that's right. I had found this letter and blah, 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 and there was this chapter ending or whatever that told me a little bit more. So, like, the hooks are there for me to find my way back to the story, and that's good, and that's much to the game's credit, especially with all the side stuff. So
the main story is also dead simple for so far,
true.
It's like it's not that. I don't think you're missing much.
That's fair.
At least where we are so far, and I think that's fun. One funny thing about the way I'm playing in my memory of the game, because obviously when I played it in the past, which I think was 2 complete times, 1 co-op and 1 solo, my memory is I'm coming to terms with now. My memory is mainly of the side stuff.
Yeah.
And now that I'm in this playthrough, I'm playing kind of beelining it through the main story. I'm kind of like, what? This is it? Like, this is all I'm doing right now, because there's really generally only 1 quest associated with the main quest at a time. But anyway, to your point about like giving them options to essentially level up or not, like we have modern systems that have tackled that, I think, in clever ways where, and I'm actually about to bring this back to Ocarina of Time for a second in a hilarious way, but, you get to a point where your party's leveled up or a character's leveled up or whatever, and they give you a point that you then have to spend, but you don't have to spend it right there. Right.
Right.
And so you can then, therefore you have that sort of player driven ramp up based on you now have this thing banked. Like we're playing, I don't know why anyone would do this in this case, but we're playing Path of Exile together, right? And like you have those points that you don't have to spend on your skill tree. You can spend them whenever you want. You could accrue them or whatever, right? If you wanted some sort of, that's a different problem because it's dynamic difficulty. But the way I was going to bring it back to Ocarina is our conversation about the hearts at the end of dungeons, where you can choose to pick it up or not. It's the same thing. It's the same thing where it's like, do you want to make the game easier for you? You can choose, because I remember I asked, like, why would you not pick that up? And then we had somebody write in and said, there actually is a really good reason not to pick it up. And it blew my mind. It was just like, that was probably one of my biggest design revelations of last year.
In theory, you could not level your characters because it's a choice to go and hit the level up button as well right here.
Yeah, that's true. And you could delay that too.
You could delay that, and I think
I wonder
the XP
what happens.
The XP is
it bank
theoretically it banks it. I think you continue to gain XP.
Yeah, I wonder if you didn't use it and then you leveled up another time.
Well, I was going to bring it back to tabletop because the way, because we're both playing in each other's campaigns. And in my campaign, the experience points that you accrue are based on your level because, of course, the skills and all that stuff that you have at that level set what the difficulty is, right? And so I think the thinking is until you actually level up, you continue to get experience points as if you were at the level, before leveling up, because you still are at the power level, of level 1 versus level 2. And you get less from an encounter. Those kobolds that are all of, an experience point apiece or whatever, that gets even less the higher level you get, right? So it's like, now I'm level 5. Kobolds are 1 XP, or 0 maybe even. I think at some point things literally, wither away to nothing. So there's the possibility to avoid
math.
Yeah.
Use math.
But you guys are basically you're killing things that if you leveled up, you'd get less experience points from them. So you're actually going to be in a better position for the next level that you level up because you'll have gotten a lot of stuff. You've gotten a lot of experience points out of what you've been doing over the last several weeks, I guess is what I would say.
Right. Well, so it's interesting because we can use our games as examples here because on the flip side, as you know, in the game that I'm running that you're playing in, that is, I've chosen, in fact, the adventure is written this way and I would have chosen it even if it hadn't been, but it's milestone-based. And so they have guidelines on achieving a certain milestone in the game. I don't keep track of XP. I don't keep track of how much you're killing things or, role-playing things or what have you. And when you get to certain milestones, then you level up. And what's going to reveal a little bit for you that I don't want you to meta too much when we're playing, pretty soon you guys have achieved enough of a milestone to where the chapter you're in will essentially gain you no more levels. You can go around and do the quests that are, because in this particular adventure, even though it's tabletop, it's the structure of it is basically open world. So you guys can kind of go wherever you want to. And so you could keep doing like quote unquote town quests, right? But they won't give you any more XP. And it's actually, they've written it in that way. It's like once they get to this level, they're not getting anything else from this chapter. So they can do that for gear or reputation or whatever, but as far as XP goes,
or for fun,
yeah, and right, exactly for fun.
If you're engaged in the story, that's like I said with the side quests. If there was a point at which they're like, you know what, you're leveled up, but you no longer like chapter 1 quests no longer grant any XP. Whatever. Yeah. And it's like at that point, yep. And you're signing up for that, and that's the contract, and you're fine with that. But if you want to go do that stuff's still there, and might be fun. It might be fun to romp through and kill every gnoll when you're level 20, or whatever. I doubt it. I think it would get tedious after a while. But it's sort of like being in an MMO and being max level or something like that and going to the starting, location and just walking by and just as you run by things, you click as you're nearing them. And at some point you attack and you kill it in one shot and, you just one shot everything in the level and then you leave,
Right.
It's like that. So,
and the content in Baldur's Gate, I think, is good enough, and especially the side content. It is worth just doing for fun too. You know what I mean? Like some of the stories and things are cool. So it's like
because I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, and I think that and for tabletop, I think that's sort of a similar thing. At least in the Icewind Dale one we're doing, because it is so broad. Like there are a lot of fun stories to be had, right? Even if you guys have hit the level ceiling for this chapter or whatever. So there might still be good reasons to do that extra stuff. Yeah.
I mean, part of what drives it to sort of switch tracks a little bit, and part of what drives me on is I actually like uncovering a whole map and having lots of little battles, because I actually find myself enjoying the tactical battles.
Wow, that's a segue.
Yep. I actually I find myself really enjoying pausing and thinking about, like, well, how long have I been going? What spells are left? What's my current goal? If I'm actually following some side quest I'm trying to track down, like, oh, I know I'm going to have to fight these half ogres. How bad are those going to be? How long should I push myself before I rest? Because of course you can pretty much rest any time and regain your spells. There's a lot of things that are a little weird that way, where it's like, well, because the world doesn't change really with time. For the most part, we have an email about
the only disadvantage is you might get a random encounter, but
you might get a and that's not. And normally, one presumes you'll be in an area where that will not be horrible.
There's no water purification.
There's no water purification chip. No, there's not. Which is amazing, right? That game was earlier than this game. So that's a Fallout reference for folks. So it's just I do find myself with that, pausing and like thinking about what everybody's going to do. I have turned the party AI off, and I am basically controlling everybody explicitly all the time. And I like the micromanagement. Like, I'm leaning into the, okay, this person, he's closest to that enemy, so he should attack that enemy, and all of that sort of thing that goes on at that point. And whether or not to have this character use a wand of magic missiles we picked up, and help speed things along or not, because I found I have 7 dozen scrolls, that I've picked up and I'm not really using. They just kind of pile up, and I don't tend to change the spells on my spellcasters, of which I have 2 very often. So it's also like, well, maybe I should just use some of these things more. Just like I'm always wary, especially because I'm going to talk to you about this game, of ending the game with 600 things I didn't use because I was holding them back and not trusting the level designer or quest designer, I guess in this case, not trusting the level designers to place health in good places where I'm going to need it and things like that, and holding these things back for too long and all of that stuff. So
same for me. I do. And I'm trying. I think potions are the ones that I usually hold too much of. I need to use those more often. But spells as well. I too have been enjoying, especially because of the way I'm playing. There's been a couple battles, like the one in the end of chapter 2, literally the end of chapter 2 in the cave, right where Zane is. Mullahay, yeah. So like that one, for instance, because it's sort of like a surprise ambush, right? Because they kind of rush into the room, and so that one I had to reload, maybe 6 times or something. But it's kind of, in those cases, it's kind of fun because what's going to happen. So you're kind of like, well, can I set my team up in a different, my party in a different place to get ready, and then like have people in the back and kind of predict and then strategize. A little puzzly. But one thing I will say that I miss from like a Temple of Elemental Evil or which I've always missed in the Infinity Engine games, to be honest, or say Divinity Original Sin or something like that, because those are, or Fallout, right? Those are action point based systems, and so you can obviously here you can pause and really go step by step, because you can pause and have people go do different things. But like, for instance, I don't really know how long a spell is going to take, and so you kind of have to,
going to start.
Or when it's going to start. And so there's a little bit of slop in there that frustrates me because I like tactical, games. And I would have probably played Wasteland 2 if you hadn't given me the feedback you gave me as another example. But
you might love it, dude. I actually like the tactical battles. It was just the choice of structure at the literal very end of the game that frustrated me. Yeah,
maybe I'll play it someday, but anyway, yeah. Or I guess XCOM, right? It's another game we played that also was action point based. So there's it's good, and it's definitely good because I think they're experimenting with a sort of more not casual, but sort of more broader audience friendly, because I think those tactical games can be pretty I don't know, strategy game feeling, for people.
Yeah.
And I think it pushes people off. So I totally get it. It's not for everybody. So I think this is an interesting hybrid that clearly did well for them, because there are so many Infinity Engine games that use that system. But for me, I do miss some of the clarity, I think, of when, when certain things are going to go off.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's a lot of cases, especially here when you're low level, where you feel like, I just won because of the random number gods.
Yeah,
right? I've had battles where I've had to reload, and I've had a total party kill nearly, and I'll reload, and it's a breeze. And I didn't really do anything different. I just got better rolls, right? And that's that's one of the things, especially at this, as low level characters, where your chances of hitting, like, how many battles am I sitting there where it's really just all melee? I'm not going to cast any spells, and people are just in there, firing arrows and swinging swords, and all I can hear is the sound effects of swords missing.
Yeah, it's so funny sometimes.
You're just like, I just listened to 7 things not hit in a row, it's
and the enemies too, right? Like, there would be times when both teams are just whiffing, and you're just like, wow, what's happening? Yeah. But then they have some nice little tidbits. Like, I assume I haven't looked at it, dissected it, but I assume when the screen shake happens, it's a crit or something.
Yeah, that's a crit, I think. Yeah.
And then occasionally, if you like do extra damage to something, you can like jib them or whatever. And so they've added some flavor in there that makes, some of the high points of battles cool, and feel for such a, like, everything on screen so tiny, and there's not a lot other than the music to really add drama. They've tried to add some extra flavor, which I appreciate.
It's very entertaining to see something suddenly erupt into parts. I'm sure it's, crits I think are I don't remember the crit rolls, the critical, the rules for
that's
1
a good
and
point.
2.
Yeah,
I think they're even rarer back then than they are now, and it might be like a crit with max damage or something leads to, I honestly don't remember, and I haven't taken the time to look, and maybe I'll make a note to look at that narrator.
Exactly. Yeah, ironically, my 2nd edition book is like almost arm's reach from me right now. So
I know it's next to the computer where I play the game, where I stream the game. So I actually had one of them out last night while I was streaming. I brought the monster manual down because I was like, I wonder how you pronounce Xvart, and I went and looked, and it wasn't in the base monster manual. So I'm like, oh well, I can't tell you. And then I was geeking out about, like, oh man, I used to love the monster manual because it had a monster on every page instead of just broken up like parts of pages and rolling onto the next page to save paper and ink. It would just, like, every monster had at least a page, a whole page devoted to itself. And I was like, oh, it's so good. And people were mocking me. I see you out there, Calamity, mocking me for enjoying the layout of the manual more than the actual content.
He's a troublemaker.
He is.
I wanted to, before I forget though, you mentioned Drizz't up top. I do think we've met Elminster.
Oh, we have. I've met him twice. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. There was a note, right, that we got from Gorion.
Yep.
That was signed E, and then when we got to that first little town, he met us like on the road in, I think, right?
Yeah, he meets you on the road in, and then he meets you again if you bring the if you go back to Baragost with the mysterious liquid that makes the iron soft.
Which I just did that. Yeah.
Yeah, I ran into him in front of the Thunderhead Smithy or whatever it's called, the Thunder something Smithy.
Oh, okay, yeah. I haven't. Okay,
he introduced himself as Elminster at that point.
Okay, but then I just didn't. I didn't do the second step with the liquid. I just realized I brought it back, and then they said you got to go talk to this other guy. Okay, so then I would have met him if I didn't continue on in my beeline fashion toward the bandit camp.
Yeah, I think it might have been the second time I went there. So you like bring it to him once, and then he's like, "Come back in a few days, and I'll tell you." But I think you can ignore that at that point. I think you could just be like, "Yeah, I don't care." Like so.
Where did you end exactly? Did you just finish 2, or did you play any of 3?
I played some of 3 because I did go and find Tazok, I guess his name was, at
The bandit.
the bandit on the second floor of the inn in the Feldepost Inn in Baragost. There's a dude.
Oh
up there,
yeah.
and then
he's not. He works for Tazok. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So he's Transig then. So he tells you to go get the Tazok's the one you actually want.
Yeah.
And then you have a fight with him or not. You can not have a fight with him, I guess. I had a save where he was fighting me, and then he was like, no, let me go. And I was like, okay, you can go. And he went yellow, like he went to status yellow as he was running away.
Mm-hmm.
But he wouldn't leave the inn, and he just ran around in there. And I was like talking with other people, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on with this dude. And then at a certain point, he and it was a long time that I was in there. Like I was, looking at what stuff that the bartender or that the inn had for sale, and I was selling stuff, and I was I had to talk to Officer Vi, maybe, like a whole bunch of stuff that was going on in there. And then I came back out into the main room, and he regained hostile status.
Oh no!
And killed somebody in the party with his first shot. And I was like,
oh no!
I just spent all this time doing these things because I thought you were done with me. Oh, it was very. Yeah. I mean, it's just
so
weird.
He was downstairs, or where did he?
Yeah, I had kited him downstairs because
okay.
I had gone up, because it's often just faster to go up and downstairs just as one person. So I would just take the main character and run him around trying to find the guy. And then I had the conversation. He was like, battle, and
then you ran down.
And then I ran downstairs to where the rest of the party was, because I couldn't at that point move the party to me. So I was like, I'll go down there, I'll get the party and come up. But he followed me down. It was a whole thing. It was very entertaining. So yeah, there's some weird edge cases that, I totally get, especially given that in this engine, probably quest designers were figuring those things out rather than a systemic thing that happens.
Yeah.
Right? And they're like, well,
scripting.
walk to stairs and then delete yourself or something like that is probably a thing that was in there.
Yeah.
But it was like, oh, but the stairs aren't on my map, so I can't walk to the stairs. Therefore, I'll just be in this behavior now. Like the script ends, and now he's not under script control, and he becomes under systemic enemy control because there's nothing else to do with him at that point. So I totally see. Yeah, exactly. ISV. That's funny. That's QA hat Tim there saying in shipping version. Yeah, for sure. That's exactly what that is. They
ISV'd that and said, well, what it is.
If the player is a jerk and kites him downstairs, then the player deserves whatever it is.
Right.
What we would have said back in the day.
Did you see in the town that starts with an N? I forget.
Nashkel.
Nashkel. Did you go to the graveyard and see the crypt that's there and read it?
I saw a number of things, but not the crypt. I read a few of them, but I was streaming and I was like, well, I'm not going to read all of these. Back in the day, I'm sure I read literally every one of them because that's the way it was in 1998.
I'm sure you don't mind me spoiling.
No.
It's
not a spoiler.
Crypt. Yeah, it's not a spoiler. But on the crypt, it's in the back, so it's like a big crypt structure, and it says, "Here lies Ray, who once uttered this game is going to kill him." And so obviously it's Ray.
Yeah. Ray.
Musica? Yeah, Musica, right?
Yeah.
But the reason I bring it up is that, as far as QAing and kind of like the edge cases of this game, I can imagine for them being their first kind of big game like this, that it probably was a nightmare. And there probably are a lot of ISVs in this game that they're just like, you know what? We got to ship this game.
Yes. I will say, absolutely, that is the case when one makes a big RPG. I'm just saying. I'm not going to point out any specifics that I might know about, but that happens.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I mean, and a part of it is, and this is really developer kind of, inside baseball, is because of the division of labor there is often, well, you're scripting a bunch of things that we don't control programmatically. And
debugging
and if you don't think of all the cases that could happen in your script, then it will fall back onto some systemic behavior that we have. And the state that you enter that in will be what happens. So things that run away, we have a state that the timer is now now there's a timer before they'll become hostile again, and it just goes on until that timer runs out, and now they're hostile again. And that's the state that I fell through to, was a systemic state. It's really funny as a developer, especially as a longer time developer now, to look at this and say, oh, I see exactly how this happened. The scripter didn't find some edge case that I happened to play it into because of other things going on in the game. And they probably knew about it. There's probably too many of those to fix. And they just let it go, which is fine. Because there's an easy remedy. I had a quick load, I had to redo some stuff, big deal. That's the way we were back then. And some companies still are. So,
well, in this, as we know from a BioWare's perspective, this was an early game for them, and it was the first game of theirs like this. And there probably were a lot of new developers on it, especially designers. And, there's a, I don't know, I guess I could call it an art form to writing a script that does account for all the cases in clever ways. That's a talent. And yeah, you can write linear scripts that do the specifically obvious things that you would think, but to think of the edge cases and to kind of make it more bulletproof in like not a systemic way, but in a logistical way or something. It's a hard thing. And there's some people who are really good at it and think like a programmer thinks or whatever, as far as like how to make a bulletproof script, or even level design and script combination.
I was going to say, it might not have even been possible, right? You think about it, it's like, well, run back to this place, basically and we're diving way too much into like the specifics of it. Like this one guy was like, run to this place and disappear from the world, right? Was probably what his script was. I'm guessing based on the bug that I saw. Well, okay, so I realized that, and maybe I'm like, okay, well, if you bring him down to the next floor, then make him run to the exit, because that's a thing he can do, and disappear from the world. But they didn't think of that. But okay, but then you kite him out to outside. Well, now what does he do, right? Yeah. Do I now think run to the entrance? Like, how far can I kite him? It gets endless. If there isn't a way to like have the pathing go, oh, I can path to the place. And this is a performance problem, right? Is like the place that I want to go is the top of the stairs. Well, he theoretically could have actually still gone upstairs, loaded into the other part of the map, and gone out and left and been deleted, right? It's just their system probably didn't support that, right? That he couldn't actually path to the place that he wanted to leave the world at, right? So that the programmers kind of let him down in that sense, right? That he couldn't get back to the place that the script wanted to take him. Would be my read of what probably happened. It
could be, yeah. I was going to add an additional, like, let's keep going down this silly rabbit hole, but
yes.
But yeah, there is the thinking it through from all those, and then to some degree, like the contingencies are just too many to worry about. And yeah, do you then have him run to the edge of the zone and then whatever? The other side of it, though, if I think from an aesthetic side, there could have been an unrealistic policy that isn't really necessary anymore of, hey, we're going to try to maintain immersion so much that when somebody leaves, goes downstairs, or something like in that case, when he's leaving and trying to escape, we don't want him to pop out of existence because it'll break immersion. It could have been a creative decision. And they're like, well, we can't just have him pop out of existence because Ray told us we can't do that, then, but now it's like in MMOs or wherever, it's like they walk 10 feet and then they just disappear.
They just fade.
And it's like, who cares? Like, I don't care.
Right. Yeah.
At the end of the day,
that's
fine.
true. Yeah.
So it could have come from either direction, but yeah, we can blame the programmers for now.
Yeah, that's fine. It wouldn't surprise me. They had a lot to do just to build this thing besides.
Yeah, no, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, that's still, it's a feat. And all that being said, even though we're finding some of these edge cases, I still think for its time and for its scale, the game is actually fairly polished. It's amazingly solid most of the time for what it is. So, yeah. So that was a weird diversion.
That was a weird aside that I did not expect to have with tactical battles. I wanted to actually segue to the topic that you had brought up because it ties in with tactics a little bit. And it's like the number of verbs some characters have over others.
Yeah.
You had mentioned the sort of fighter mage dichotomy. Actually, when I say fighter mage, I also want to point out something about second edition that I looked up because I couldn't remember, and I mentioned it previously. So quick aside. Remember I mentioned the character with 2 classes versus multi-class characters?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have a vague memory.
In second edition, and this may have also been true in first, I did not go that far back, only non-human characters could be multi-classed.
Oh, boy.
There were only specific allowed multi-class combinations, and humans were allowed to be a character with 2 classes. And the distinction there was the character with 2 classes is more like what multi-class is today, which is you choose which class you're going to level up when you level up.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yep.
And multi-class was you got some experience points. They are split between your classes, however many you have as a multi-class, and you could have up to 3. But you couldn't pick whatever ones you wanted. It was only fighter, fighter mage, fighter cleric thief, fighter druid, whatever. It was only certain things. It was this very specific set. There's a lot, but it's only a specific set. What a weird choice. Okay.
Yeah.
Back to the verb set of fighters versus mages.
Well, I mean, yeah, kind of, I guess kind of ironically a little bit related to multi-classing, but yeah, I think the thing that I've actually had this opinion for a long time, and I think it hasn't come up with any other games we've played, but it's been a frustration for a while because I generally play martial-based classes, and usually a ranger, but I'm kind of migrating toward clerics these days. There's June.
Yep.
Anyway, wouldn't be a podcast without her.
Piping up, she's shouting one out for the clerics.
Yeah, exactly. But in this game, it really is a lot more obvious than usual because you have obviously you are playing a character, but really you're playing a party, and so you're basically constantly micromanaging all. If you have a diverse party of classes, you're probably micromanaging an example of each category, if you will. And so it's just in this game, like, when you're going in and you're with your mage or whatever, and you're picking your wizard and you're picking all the different spells that they're memorizing. And then you can obviously sort of quote unquote spec what we would call today, like spec them in a certain direction. So for instance, with Nira, for me, I've decided to make her very much crowd control centric rather than like a damage dealer. And because of her spell variety, I can do that, right? Even between memorizations, I can respec her, so to speak. And so all of the verbs that she has, because her spell book is so diverse, you can really like do a bunch of different interesting things if you really want to spend the time doing it. Then on the flip side, you have a fighter who literally has one verb basically, and it's just hit things, and there's no tactics to that anyway, really. I mean, sometimes you can put them on defense, but it's like that doesn't really do anything other than that's just more for, I actually don't know what that's for, to be honest. I can't think of a case where you would use that, but
there might be a very limited, I have seen some aggro sort of model behavior in this game, so I could see you maybe trying to tank. Like, I do one good whack, and then I guard. Because,
maybe.
Because
I
I
feel
like
with it more, maybe.
I feel like I've seen enemies switch behaviors, or switch targets, rather, in the middle of a battle when I was like, why would they do that? Oh, I guess they just took a bunch of damage from that person. They're now going to target that person. Yeah. Which is interesting, but not clearly communicated. So
Right. Well, even then, it's like that's a verb that's infrequently used, and it's only a second one anyway. And so I think in second edition, it's just there's such a gap between those sorts of categories of characters. It sort of like just puts shines a light on, I think, an inherent problem with the way that works. And I don't, I've always, even as a player of second edition and first back in the day, I've always wondered why that's there, like what is the inherent sort of desire that people have for playing. And I guess there's some argument to be made for the variability for melee classes are really the weapons, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to get this weapon, or I'm going to use this weapon, or this is going to be a +2 weapon. and I'm going to switch to my bow now, which they kind of do have like weapon slots in this game that you can arm them with multiple weapons essentially, but you obviously can't use them both at the same time. So there's some, I guess, weapons is where they're kind of trying to, but it's just not the same to me because you're not fully respecing, because you probably have proficiencies, right, that you can't change as dynamically as you can memorize spells. And so there's just a wide gap there that is just even more pronounced because of the way this game is structured, because you're playing the full party. And I just found that fascinating.
It is,
that's the case.
And it's because so much of what a fighter could do, right? They're a strong, often dexterous class. They might have hardy constitution, right? Tactically, you're using them in the way that you would use them at tabletop, but there's a lot of stuff you would do outside of combat as a fighter. You'd be the one who helps everybody climb up a cliff because you can climb it because you're strong, and then you use a rope. Or you're going to be the ones who batter down a door because you're strong, right? I mean, it's like the things that you could do were sort of based purely on your strength. I remember that the old tables would have like literal extra columns for like what you could do, specifically with doors. I remember was a thing like you can break a door of this much, right? Or you can jump this far,
right.
And
those are removed from this game,
right? And that's there's no need for that here. That's not here. And so a lot of what it does sort of point out the misfit in some ways of the mechanics to the game that they're building, right? Because a lot of what they're trying to simulate, they're leaving out, or a lot of the things that differentiate the things they're trying to simulate, they reasonably are leaving out. Like I don't fault them for leaving them out. It was always silly to me that how many things were bound up like in that way, and I loved the change in third edition to add explicit skill uses or skill points rather of like putting in that's more GURPS like
skills are a great game changer. Huge. And I think that's the second part of my point that I forgot until you mentioned that, but like third, fourth, and fifth, fourth I don't think either of us played, but third and fifth specifically, and I think fifth goes even further because they have skills, but they also have more abilities, class abilities that you get as you level up, even for the martial classes. And so there's this sense of, it's called an ability, a class ability, but it's kind of a spell, right? It's like now I have this thing where I can use a bonus action, where I couldn't normally use it. And so they kind of I think they've gotten better and better, and maybe even solve this problem in the future, because I do think that gap has always been there, and maybe they're trying to solve it, because you do feel kind of as a martial class you're getting abilities in the modern design. The one class that I will say in second edition that they got right when it comes to number of verbs in this game is Thief, though, because Thief has so many cool things, to your point, out of combat things that it can do, that she can do, in Imoen, at least for me, that it's kind of a delight to play, because you're like, oh, which one, what am I? And then when you level up her skills, she has so many skills you can kind of focus on, right? Do I want to be a stealthy one, or traps, or pickpocket, or whatever? And so she's definitely a Swiss Army knife in that way.
And for me, I have two thieves in the party because I also have the main character, Samia. I actually can choose to do them differently, right? So I can cover more of it, and really special. One of the things I constantly have to do, though, is when we're back to moving around, we've finished combat, we're in a dungeon, and I want to be looking for traps, I have to specifically select him and re-enable the trap finder every time, and that's just funny. Which is the way it works. It's also something that, certain parties that I DM should probably do more than they do. They don't. Getting better. Better.
All right.
Yeah. Well, it's it happened this last time. It worked out pretty well, though. So anyway.
My dwarven cleric is just going to be the trap triggerer. I'm just going to walk into things. That was very hard. That's very funny. That whole thing. Yeah, we can talk about that offline. It's a little bit too off the beaten path, I think, for the podcast listeners. Yeah.
I guess the last thing we should touch on is the curation versus random generation topic that you had mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, you had said in pre-show like that you were drawing a pretty big distinction between this game where everything feels curated and placed as it often does in D&D campaigns versus a more procedural, you know, randomly placed or placed on some sort of difficulty tiers or what have you, engine such as Diablo, which is more or less a contemporary of this game, you know, only a couple of years before.
Yeah. And I think for the most part has largely become, for various reasons, more of the dominant model, the Diablo model.
Yeah.
And I just brought that topic up because it's kind of been nice to feel like you're playing a game that obviously they, as we said many times, they're trying to emulate tabletop, which, as Brett said, is generally curated. There's some random generation on coins sometimes or whatever, but generally you know where things are. And it's just been nice to come back to that to some degree in a CRPG, because in modern days, I play so many, like I mentioned Path of Exile earlier, play so many random, you know, and so there's good production reasons why random generation helps and why it adds to the long tail of the game and all those sorts of things. But at the same time, you really miss something, you know, you miss that hand placed, you know, that little touch that somebody has put into the level and quest design of an area. You know, there's this one in the Nashtal or Nashgal or whatever it's called. Nashgal.
I'm correcting you here on the lore. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I will admit, because I'm racing through, I've not been focused on lore as much as I usually am. But anyway, you may or may not have found it, of course. There's in the farmlands down southwest of the town, there's one little pixel that is in the rows of farmland that houses a piece of really powerful armor that somebody basically, I guess, buried there or something. And you go and you dig it up, and now you have a really awesome piece of armor. And I'm just like, who does this? Like, this is like a very specific little thing, you know?
Yeah.
And I only found it because I have the interact, toggle on most of the time. So you see everything that's interactable. Yeah. So it's just this tiny little.
I think that might be an enhanced edition.
I think it is. Yeah.
As well. Yeah. So.
Because you can imagine, right? That's a perfect like 90s
exactly.
Water cooler. Like, did you find the armor?
Yeah.
Like, it's buried in the. It's where? No, it's not. And then you're pixel hunting, right, to find it. But anyway, it's like that.
Find that. I didn't even think.
Yeah, you should.
I mostly play with it off. So
right.
Because I want to have because I was like, I don't think that was there before. I would remember that. Sometimes I turn it on because I'm looking for a character. I'm in an inn, and I'm like, who is the one? Like, these are all commoners. Which one? And there's like too much of a delay. Like, you mouse over with somebody and you wait a while. I'm like, ugh. You know, like,
it's a speed thing for me. I turned it on mainly for speed because, to be honest, it does feel like it's breaking some stuff. But you know, there's also another example in one of the forests where there's like a stump with a tiny ring, you know, in it that's like the interact is like 4 pixels. Right. But anyway, you know, it's just that kind of stuff is just delightful, and it feels more tabletop-y, right? And it feels right. But then you can kind of see how the industry migrated away from that. I will admit, as I think I've said before, that I'm not a Dragon Age player, so I don't know how they handle it in Dragon Age, like speaking about a modern version of this. But for instance, I'm also playing Divinity Original Sin right now, and even though that's a very D&D inspired game, it's turn-based, it's tactical, it's like very traditional RPG. They also have random loot for a lot of it, like not all of it, but a lot of it is random loot. So it's like, I don't know. I'm kind of bummed sometimes about that. But sorry, what were you going to say?
Good question. What I was going to say is that, like, although it feels very tabletop-y, it also really exposes its limits, because I remember back in this time, my big dream for, you know, something I would like to make at the time was to have an ecology of this stuff, like that things would progress if I didn't deal with them. So, you know, that because that's what's not happening here. And that's what happens at a tabletop, right? Here, it's like everything's waiting until the player shows up, right?
Oh, I see. Yeah. So like a world system behind the scenes.
Exactly. Right. That makes it so that like, and that's in a way a dynamic difficulty. It's like, well, you don't deal with the spider cave or whatever. Well, the spiders get bigger. There's more of them. They start eating townspeople from the nearby town, and like whatever, is an ecology thing that could happen because you were busy going to find the mythic sword to the north instead of dealing with the cave to the east, right? And having these ways of having things progress, because that's the thing that I miss. And like that kind of ties into, and it's probably a good place to kind of tie these things off in a bow, what we were talking about at the beginning of the cast, which is, well, now if I went back and did this stuff, I'd be over leveled and it wouldn't be fun to do the combat, right? If things progressed when you weren't there, then it would, because it would always be sort of keeping up. And dynamic difficulty sort of hides that from you, right? The progression, it's just new things are spawned, right? It's done procedurally. You might be able to imagine a story, but the story isn't really there. And what I always wanted was like, no, there's a simulation for like how the world progresses, and that's something I always thought would be really, really interesting to explore. But as a person now who's made games for a while, I also think I'd be crazy to try.
I don't know. It sounds pretty interesting to me.
Back in the day, maybe it would have been a thing I should have tackled. Anyway, so let's put a pin in Baldur's Gate there, and I would like to take a quick break and come back and do some email.
Okay, sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. Thanks so much for waiting. So let's turn to email first. Before we do that, I wanted to mention we're going to try to keep our original schedule, which is we're going to do chapters 4 and 5 for next week, which will mean I'll probably be streaming even more of this game than I have been, because I've been dilly-dallying and going all over the world, exploring whole areas of maps. And that's been a little more exhaustive and taking more time. But I will get back on the horse. I'll move a little bit more quickly, and you'll probably have more opportunity to see me stream. We have email at devgameclub@gmail.com, and we're going to read a couple. We got a bunch, but we're running short on time, so we're just going to read one a piece and reply. So go ahead and read us the first one there, sir.
Subject is Baldur's Gate from Ashton Herman. Hello, Ashton. Hey, Brett and Tim. I really enjoyed your series on Ocarina of Time, which is a game that's so near and dear to the hearts of so many of my friends that I love it a lot by proxy, even though I'd actually rank it in my personal fourth favorite Zelda game. Oh, is that true? Okay. Love to talk about that with you sometime. I want to know what the others are. I could probably guess at some, but see, I never had an N64 growing up. I split my game time between PC gaming and Sega consoles, and wouldn't you know it, the game that launched in 1998 that I hold most near and dear to my heart is none other than Baldur's freaking Gate. I hope you won't mind if I just reminisce here for a quick moment. I actually didn't play Baldur's Gate until it was at least a year or two old. I think I was 15, and a friend of mine had just returned home from a trip with a new game that he'd picked up in a shop at the airport. He'd heard that Baldur's Gate was great and couldn't believe his luck when he found it for a mere $20. He spent the night at my house, and we installed the game on my PC and took turns playing it. Oh my God, I am the vision of what is happening in my head right now. I love that they are sitting there cracking this particular game open for the first time, because I also, even though I play console games, I was a PC player. I'm speaking as Tim, by the way, right now.
Yes, yeah.
So ananyway, I love this story.
Same for me. Like I played Ultima 6, I guess it was, with a friend, where like we were each trying to play it, and I had the copy, and we were both like, we were swapping the discs or whatever you had to do. I don't remember. But, and at a certain point, we were like, you know what, we should just play this together. And we went to an office where one of us was working at the time to use one of those computers and just bunked in for a whole weekend and didn't sleep. Yeah. We just played continuously from Friday night till late sometime Sunday to play through that game.
It's good. Good times.
Something else.
We were immediately sucked. Like he goes on, we were immediately sucked in. Neither of us really knew about anything about D&D, so we were just blown away by the number of races and classes and character creation, and the character's narrative really pulled us in right from the get-go. After about an hour or two, we arrived at Friendly Arms Inn, and the game ended. Oh no! Oh no! It was a demo. It was a demo. My poor friend had spent $20 on a demo disc. I was going to say that was a pretty good deal. To say he was disappointed would be an understatement. Well, I didn't see that coming. I didn't read ahead. Truly, I think he was on the verge of tears, but we made the best of the situation and spent the night rolling tons of different character classes and playing through the first couple hours of the game over and over. I believe this was around Christmas time, so it wasn't long after that night that he and I exchanged gifts. My friend had gotten me my very own copy of Baldur's Gate, and this time it was the full retail version. The rest is history. Can't wait to hear the rest of the series. Thanks for all you do, Ashton Herman. That's great.
That is amazing.
I can't.
This was totally the time. Yeah, this is totally the time where you are hoodwinked into like you didn't. You were. I mean, you see it. Like I was in a rush at the airport. I walked into this place. I was like, oh my god, Baldur's Gate, $20. Yeah. Didn't read the fine print where it's Baldur's Gate, and then the next word in 6-point font was demo. $20, and yeah, this was
I can't. I mean, also just the setup of them being there, playing together, yeah. And they're like, you can just see them leaning forward, looking at the monitor for all these hours, and they're like, "Oh my god, we're the Friendly Arms Inn," and then.
Thanks for playing our demo.
Yeah, it's like, and then there's them. Yeah, that is rough. That's rough.
But I'm sure he remembers that friend fondly even today, as I still remember Rob fondly, who I was referring to just a moment ago with Ultima. Those things your friendships are born in that cauldron. Rob, I hope you're doing well. I don't think he listens, but you never know. All right, I have one here from Dan Hunter. From Guernsey. It says the subject is role-playing games, Vampire the Masquerade, and Baldur's Gate. Hi, Brett and Tim. I just wanted to drop you a line to say thanks for your insightful, informative podcast. I've just listened to your Baldur's Gate podcast and enjoyed the ruminations on the THACO system. Oh boy, we spent a long time on that. I have fond memories of THACO, as it was how original D&D calculated combat. I even use it as the basis of a simple coding challenge for my computing students. The discussion regarding its cumbersomeness rings true, as a younger friend was arguing over its dreadfulness as a foundation of the combat system when compared with later editions of the combat rules. Due to my age, I couldn't help dismissing her arguments as coming from the arrogance of youth. With hindsight, together with your own discussion, I can now admit that I am looking at THACO with rose-tinted glasses. Although in computer games, THACO is not a player problem, but one for the developers, and the BioWare RPGs handle it well. I really enjoyed the Vampire the Masquerade interview with Brian Mitsoda, especially the discussion surrounding the infamous Ocean House quest and the fight to not include combat. I remember playing the unofficial Aliens Total Conversion for Doom, where a similar design decision was made not to include encounters in the first level, which totally builds up atmosphere and dread. So when something does happen, it's like a pressure valve going off. The interview was a great behind-the-scenes discussion, especially writing versus narrative design, and gave us, the listeners, a real insight into the development of this cult title. Your conversations regarding introducing players who are new to role-playing worlds struck a chord. The choice of a newly sired vampire makes perfect sense as a design choice. I'm currently replaying the enhanced edition of The Witcher, and I had that light bulb moment when I realized the reason behind Geralt's amnesia is so NPCs can tell the player about the world and lore. It's so obvious once it's been pointed out. I got there in the end. See also Planescape Torment. Keep up the good work. Stay safe. From Dan Hunter. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, Dan's written in multiple times. He is he's a bit of a professor over there. Actually, I had forgotten these two didn't have questions in them. I guess we could do a couple more. We each have one more that we could read this week. Thanks for those. You want to go ahead and do Warren's?
Sure. Yeah, and to Dan's point about amnesia, the true challenge is how to find ways to do it other than amnesia.
Oh yeah, I mean, fair point. You know, it's funny. We had email from our friend Reed, who we've interviewed on the cast. He had been re-listening and was relitigating our TIE Fighter episodes. And as part of I guess it was a separate email. He had recently played Uncharted 2 and 3 and was talking about the story in those. So I went back and was watching some of the video from Uncharted 2, which was a game I really liked when it came out. In fact, I've since replayed it and thought it still held up pretty well. And he had some comments on the story that I was like, I don't remember it that way. And then I started playing on YouTube here are just the cutscenes. And it does the same sort of thing where Nathan Drake is very knowledgeable about all these archaeological things, but they basically use the other people around him to say, hey, what's that? At all these different points to sort of get you into the plot. It's a very sort of similar mechanism, narrative mechanism for making it possible for the player to have a foothold in this universe. And of course that's set in ostensibly the real-ish world, right? I mean, it's modern day and all that stuff. So it's not a huge bridge to cross. But in these other, when it's like, oh, it's all this mythology about vampires and possibly also werewolves and maybe other things as well, it gets to be a bit more. So anyway, why don't you go ahead and read Warren's?
Okay, Baldur's Gate quest time mechanics. Warren Linham Church. Baldur's Gate had a quest mechanic that I love in theory, but always hated in practice. Some quests, like the Poison Man you might run across, have a strict timer. Bring him to a healer within 24 hours or he dies. In theory, this is neat since time is how you recover your potentially have an interesting choice to make about whether to push on to compete.
There's a missing comma there. Since time is how you recover, you potentially have an interesting choice to make. Yeah.
Right. To make about whether to push on to complete a quest at reduced strength ASAP or to take a chunk of your available time to recover. In a game where you pretty much need to be at full strength for most encounters, this seems like a neat way to try out another way to play. The problem, at least for me, was that I always ended up with multiple quests like this, so it was impossible to do all of them. This was frustrating because it didn't feel like I was being asked to make a prioritization decision. I just happened to try out the wrong solution and got another timed quest foisted on me. I'm sure some of this is just them figuring out what works. I recall a lot less people accosting you with non-critical quests, path quests in Baldur's Gate 2, for example. But it does seem like the industry as a whole has moved away from tying quest completion to a timer, even when it leads to some silly result. And then he has an asterisk about, I got burned by this in Mass Effect 2 on my first playthrough. People will know what that means if you played that game. Final paragraph. Is there a way to make this work on a quest level? Lots of games do it moment-to-moment gameplay with things like cooldowns and charging powers. Certainly, later BioWare games are more interested in storytelling than that kind of emergent gameplay, so it makes sense they would move towards letting you see the quest content at your pace. Maybe it's just hard to do for a broad player base that doesn't want to take on that kind of frustration. Maybe I just haven't played the games that do it. Warren, Linham Church.
Yeah, so I mean, my first thought, so hearing it again, I realized when I read it the first time, just when it came in, that I missed some of the nuances here. Like, oh, well, it's because my initial reaction was, well, whenever you get a timed quest, you have to just immediately do it, and do it, and not pick up any other quests. But part of the nuance here is like, oh, I talked to somebody, and that wasn't
foisted upon you.
I got another one, and yeah, I mean, for me, I think the way I would do this would be to continue to push the player. Like, we have mechanically in this game a way to interrupt rest with random encounters. I would use that to have it interrupt and say, "Oh, I'm getting sicker," right? And just have this guy that you're supposed to deal with, like, interrupt your rest and maybe force you to deal with it, right? I think would be an interesting mechanical way to do it, in keeping with this system, so that you basically are, having picked this guy up, kind of locked into him. Sort of like you are with that guy Nuber or something like that, who like follows you around and talks to you everywhere. You have to like try to outrun him. I don't know if you ran into that guy.
I think I've run into him once. But,
yeah, I mean, he's just a little silly annoyance. It's like, hey, and he just keeps walking up to you and saying inane things and like interrupting you, and it's just kind of a dumb little funny, silly thing. But with a timed quest in particular, I think I would try to find ways mechanically to reinforce what they're doing. I think that's good. Would be what I would do.
Yeah, that's a good solution. Yeah, I think. I don't know if I have anything better as far as suggestions for a solution to it. The obvious. He mentions Mass Effect 2, and I think the obvious thing where the direction that everyone ended up going was giving a sense of timed, but then allowing players to go after it at their own pace. And so they're trying to kind of have their cake and eat it too there, which is always called out as a Band-Aid solution, because then the tension of that timed thing, the proverbial, the universe is going to end until you go fix it problem, right? Which is kind of, that's the common solution these days. Yeah. I don't know. I just don't think you should do them unless they're, you just need to think harder about, to his point about having them foisted upon you, just think harder about when to initiate them, or when players can initiate them. So for instance, I don't have a good like narrative example, but for instance, you do start talking to somebody and you make it clear to them that they're about to get a timed quest, and then they can opt out before they take it. You know what I mean?
Or even just not even offer it to them. Just like,
right.
They already have one.
Put it more in the player's hands. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Put it more in the player's hands. And if they already have one, then don't give them one, or just give them more tools. And this, this game is still, I think, a brilliant game in a lot of ways, but it still is very rudimentary in a lot of those sorts of usability issues, sort of like knowing what's going to happen and stuff. And I do think the journal is great for its time, but it's obviously journals have gotten much better since, as an example. But anyway,
this one is searchable, which is that's I think an enhancement as well, right? That you can search on, you can just type anything into the journal. And
no, I didn't notice that. Yeah.
I think that's an enhancement from the enhanced edition. I would guess. Although one thing I was looking for, I couldn't find. I was like, this is weird. There was one thing where I found some guy's, I don't know, sword or something. And I was like, where was that guy? And I went and searched the journal and he wasn't in it. And I was like, oh no, I guess I won't find him. But that's fine. Whatever. I'll carry around his sword. It's not perfect. No games are perfect. They're only abandoned, not perfected. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that they were trying to throw, I think what happens, right, is like everybody's got to come up with 30 quests or whatever, and they're trying all sorts of different things, and two people come up with the same idea and they don't know that they're in the same area, and there's no crosstalk, on the team maybe to help manage that issue. Or if there even is, there turns out not to be enough time to support that. So like, this game was enormous for its time. Like the amount of content in here for a 2D D&D game is really astonishing. And it doesn't even go up to that high a level, like character level, as I recall. Like it's extraordinary to think if like they had tried to push, I'm running a campaign that theoretically goes to the 20th level. We'll see if that ever happens. But, I think this game tops out around 9. I think
that rings a bell, yeah.
Something like that. I don't think it goes much higher than that. And the manual's already 250 pages of spells, right? It's because there's so much detail in there. I think that they just run into things like that, just scope problems, right? That things that happen with scale that the industry was starting to deal with just as a general problem. to deal with. So yeah, I don't know. It's something to be wary of, and to watch, and to make sure that you're measuring the content you make against the pillars that your game has. And when you're up against something like that maybe is a little edge casey, talk through it with people, kick it around, like, hey, this is a cool idea, but how to, what if this, what problems do we run into? A lot of that stuff is, there are solutions. It's just they start in the dev studio and not necessarily at the design phase. This is not like a design problem in a sort of big starting building a game way. This is a small design problem of like, oh, we were making this thing and we kind of crossed our wires a bit and maybe didn't do it as elegantly as we could have. It's a big project management problem to some degree, a production problem even. So,
well, and I think if you're making time a critical part, I mean, again, they're trying to emulate D&D, and so another clashing concept with this game is travel time, right? And rest time, right? So it's like, oh, you get a timed quest, and to finish that quest, it's going to take me 8 hours just to get to another location or something, right? So it's like, for me, I think obviously it's hindsight 2020, and they're not perfect. I'm not perfect, but as a sort of a lesson learned, like if time is ever going to be an element of, if time is ever going to be related to a failure state of some kind in the game, and that's your plan, I think you need to build the whole game around that sort of, embrace that as a thing and make it, like you said, part of the pillars of it. So everything, decisions you're making are revolving around that problem solving. I'm not meaning to bring this up because we just played it, but Ocarina of Time built time into the whole concept of the game, and so if you wanted to, you could go back in time. They could have done, they could have
been like, you know what, you can hire a wagon, and now you can hire horses, and now your travel time is half, right? And that would have been a possible solution for you, and it would have made for an interesting, solution. But again, production realities, who knows? Like if maybe that was an idea at the time, and then it got cut sometime between when the quest was implemented and et cetera, right? So there's a lot of like stuff that we don't know.
It's you can see how it got, how they were, again, sort of ISV or something, or
exactly,
or but anyway,
another thing too is to just the other thing to do, I would say, is like make the failure interesting.
That's
not just the guy died, but the guy died and then he gave you some different quest that you only get if he dies. It's like, if you could tell my wife somewhere else that's dangerous to get that I died, and I can't get back to her, and bring her my her locket, it's another thing to do, and it gives you an opportunity for more content, and it's interesting. So failure itself being interesting is another way to address, things like that, where it's like, oh, I have a possible failure state, a likely failure state even, It adds more to the schedule though. So it's, again, I understand how it happens. So, but it's another thing to try, I guess.
Yeah, those are good.
Okay. Well, the email I was going to read, I just realized I want to hold off for the future, and I don't want to dive into another one that I don't really understand the content of, because it's good size, and I don't want it to tip off too much of a discussion, because we've got some other things to get to this week off air. So thank you for joining us. We love the emails at devgameclub@gmail.com. And if you haven't previously sent us a review, please do so. We love to get those through the Apple Podcasts app or whatever platform you use. Just let us know if we don't read it. We love to read them or sing them on the air. All right, one of us likes to sing them on the air.
Yeah, let's clarify.
You like to listen to me sing on the air. Come on.
That's fair. I'll give you that.
Okay. As I said, we are going to do chapters 4 and 5 for next week, and you will be able to find me doing that on twitch.tv/Brett Douville most weeknights, and probably some on the weekends as well, because there's a lot. You can also find us on the web at devgame.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
You also are a Twitch streamer these days. You've been out there hitting men.
I am, yes. I am definitely hitting some folks with fruit and mostly soda cans, I think, is kind of one of my favorites. Just
and
nothing... Fish? Oh yeah, fish. That's a new
Oh.
that's a new classic. Yeah, that's really good. So I'm currently streaming Hitman 2, working my way to Hitman 3, and Tuesdays and Fridays, usually around 6 p.m. Pacific. So yeah, I'll come stop by if you can.
Look forward to seeing folks there. It's fun. It's a small but welcoming chat community on either of our streams. So and there's a lot of people who go to both. So we appreciate those folks.
Yeah, it's really, really appreciative.
Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers. And of course, our new logo is by Mark Garcia. I'm going to say have fun getting your party together and venturing forth this week. And good night.
Good night.